When people imagine crime bosses, they picture men, loud, violent, reckless, and powerful. But history doesn't work like that. Some of the most disciplined, high-level criminal operations were built by women who never raised their voices, never drew attention to themselves, and never left fingerprints on the chaos they created. These aren't street-level dealers. These aren't background characters. These are women who ran networks, controlled money, moved violence, and in some cases, simply disappeared. Let's take a look at who these women are. Aisha Hall. Aisha Hall didn't rob banks with a gun. She did it with paperwork, signatures, letterheads, and systems that looked so legitimate on the surface that even professionals didn't question them until it was far too late. In the late 2000s, she ran a company called Apogee Financial, Inc. And on paper, she was exactly what she claimed to be. A CEO running a financial services company that promised access to high-level funding for clients who needed large sums of money quickly. According to federal investigators and court filings, she was operating what prosecutors described as a multi-state wire fraud operation built around an obscure but powerful trick known as proof of funds. Official-looking documents that claimed millions of dollars were sitting inside real bank accounts. Her company didn't physically steal money from vaults or rob institutions. Instead, it created fake bank letters, forged account statements, and fabricated balances, often using the names and letterheads of real banks like Wells Fargo and Bank of America, making the paperwork look so convincing that lenders, investors, and business partners believed the money already existed. What made the operation truly dangerous was that it didn't stop at paperwork. When skeptical lenders called banks to verify the accounts, real people answered the phones, including co-conspirators posing as bank insiders, who falsely confirmed the account's existence, turning simple document fraud into a system that felt airtight from the outside. Clients paid staggering fees for access to this illusion, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to show a few million on paper, and in some cases hundreds of thousands for documentation that claimed access to hundreds of millions. But there was never any real money behind it, only carefully constructed paperwork and validation loops. By the time the truth surfaced, the losses had already mounted. Federal investigators later determined that more than $7 million in victim fees had been collected, and a federal court ordered Aisha Hall to repay $6.85 million in restitution. Media reports from the time alleged she had lived a lavish, multi-million-dollar lifestyle before the operation collapsed, although the exact extent was never fully documented. In March 2009, federal agents moved in, and Aisha Hall was charged in federal court in New York with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She eventually pleaded guilty and received a sentence of approximately 10.5 years in federal prison, bringing an abrupt end to the company, but not to her story. While incarcerated, she began to shift her identity, writing about power, mindset, and personal transformation, gradually turning her criminal past into intellectual property. After her release, she has publicly described herself as an author, entrepreneur, and motivational voice, and has appeared in crime-focused media, sharing her story publicly and rebuilding her image. By 2025, she presents herself as a figure focused on money, mindset, and entrepreneurship, occasionally referencing digital finance and crypto, walking a careful line between rehabilitation and controversy, because while there is no public evidence that she returned to criminal activity, her original methodology, creating financial realities on paper and convincing systems to accept them as real, has been compared by fraud experts to techniques seen in modern digital fraud schemes. Jemeker Thompson. In the 1980s, when Los Angeles was drowning in crack money and street-level power was turning into real empires, Jemeker Thompson started out as a teenager collecting drug money for her boyfriend, Anthony Daff Mosley, learning early how money moved, who could be trusted, and how quickly power could disappear. When Mosley was killed, most people expected her to fade out of the picture. She later said she took on a larger role. She didn't just sell drugs, she built infrastructure. According to court records and later reporting, Jemeker was alleged to have moved multi-kilo quantities of cocaine on a weekly basis, constructed a network that stretched across multiple cities like Alton, Illinois, and beyond, and became a supplier to dealers who depended on her like a power grid. Her operation wasn't chaotic or flashy. It was structured, mobile, and designed to survive pressure. She used multiple safe addresses, rotated phones frequently, and ensured her real location was always difficult to predict. On the surface, she presented herself as a young black entrepreneur running a hair extension business, which authorities later described as a front that helped her insulate herself from direct exposure. The shop wasn't just a cover story. It was described by investigators as part of a system authorities said was used to manage money without attracting attention. And for a while, it worked. But in 1993, she returned to Los Angeles for what should have been a normal milestone, her son's graduation, unaware that federal investigators had been tracking her for years and were waiting. The arrest wasn't loud or dramatic. She was taken into custody, charged federally, and eventually sentenced to a term reported by media to be around 15 years in prison. Most people disappear after that, but Jemeker didn't. While incarcerated, she went through a significant personal transformation, found religion, and later became an ordained minister, moving into faith-based work and public speaking after her release. She didn't try to reclaim the street image. She rebuilt herself in a completely different way. And now, in 2025, her name doesn't show up in headlines, indictments, or wiretaps. There is no public proof that she still runs anything at all. But the way she moved, hiding in plain sight, using legitimate businesses as armor, staying mobile, staying quiet, has been compared by commentators to methods seen in more recent cases. Stephanie St. Clair. Stephanie St. Clair was building a criminal enterprise at a time when most people didn't even believe women were capable of running one, especially a black immigrant woman operating in early 20th century New York. And what made her powerful was not personal violence, but how organized her system truly was. Born in the French Caribbean, likely on the island of Guadeloupe, she arrived in Harlem in the early 20th century and quickly learned how the city's underground economy functioned, embedding herself inside the illegal lottery system known as the numbers racket, a daily gambling operation where thousands of working-class residents placed small cash bets on number combinations, creating a parallel financial system that worked independently of banks, contracts, or legal protection. Every morning, collectors moved through Harlem's apartment buildings, beauty shops, corner stores, barber shops, and social clubs, gathering envelopes of cash that contained handwritten bets folded into scraps of paper, coded markings, and small prayers of luck folded inside. By midday, runners transported that cash to hidden back offices above storefronts and behind false doors, where trusted bookkeepers copied transactions into handwritten ledgers that only core members of the operation could interpret. By late afternoon, payouts were calculated, winners were identified, cash was counted by hand, and by nightfall, trusted messengers quietly delivered envelopes of money to winners without police, without contracts, and without formal protection. By the mid-1920s through the 1930s, newspaper archives and police summaries described her as controlling large portions of Harlem's gambling economy. Historians estimate Harlem's numbers industry generated between $10 million and $15 million per year at its peak, the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars in modern money, supported by dozens of workers and a rotating network of collectors, runners, bookkeepers, and enforcers operating every single day. When white organized crime figures connected to mob boss Dutch Schultz began forcing their way into Harlem's gambling territory through violence, threats, and forced partnerships, many black operators either disappeared or surrendered. St. Clair didn't. She escalated. She took out full-page newspaper advertisements accusing police officers, politicians, and city officials of corruption, publicly naming individuals and exposing how white criminal groups were protected while black operators were targeted. At a time when challenging police could get someone beaten or killed, she put their names in print. That made her untouchable to some and a target to others. Authorities increased surveillance as raids grew more frequent. Rival organizations began closing in on her territory, and the areas she once controlled started shrinking, forcing collectors to disappear, safe locations to be abandoned, and once reliable routes to become dangerous to use. By the late 1930s, the system did not collapse in a single dramatic moment, but slowly suffocated under mounting pressure. As territory was lost, alliances weakened, protection disappeared, and the structure that once quietly moved millions of dollars unraveled without a significant arrest or a televised courtroom defeat. By 2025, Stephanie St. Clair has no surviving organization, no modern criminal structure, and no living operation tied to her name. Shante Henderson. In the mid-2000s, Kansas City was one of the most violent cities in the Midwest, and one of the feared figures operating in that environment was a woman most people never saw coming, Shante Henderson. Kansas City wasn't just dangerous, it was fractured, split by territorial beefs, retaliatory shootings, and street politics that shifted overnight. In that environment, fear wasn't just a reaction, it was a currency. And Shante didn't just survive inside that world, she controlled space within it. In 2006, everything came to a head at a Kansas City gas station. Shante was accused of fatally shooting DeAndre Parker, later claiming he tried to run her over with his car and that she acted in self-defense. But when investigators reconstructed the scene, the story began to fall apart. Surveillance footage, witness timelines, and vehicle positioning didn't support a sudden accidental threat. Prosecutors later argued that the car's movement, the distance between the vehicle and Henderson, and the angle of the shots were inconsistent with a last-second act of self-preservation. Authorities alleged she had ties to the 12th Street Gang and its affiliates. Over time, law enforcement publicly described her as a high-risk fugitive and linked her name to ongoing violent investigations, though not all allegations resulted in convictions. She wasn't seen as a traditional boss giving orders from a distance. She was seen as an enforcer-type presence, someone who showed up when things needed to be handled in person. That reputation traveled faster than paperwork ever could. In 2007, her name crossed into national attention when she was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, making her one of the few women in modern history to ever appear there. Authorities described her as armed, highly dangerous, and capable of extreme violence. A reward followed, and within days, she was captured in Missouri. In 2012, in federal court, she pleaded guilty to federal weapons charges, and after violating release conditions, her probation was revoked, extending her time behind bars. Over the years, that time stretched into the 2020s, with her sentence projected to keep her incarcerated into the mid-2020s. By 2025, Shante Henderson will remain incarcerated. There is no public evidence that she runs any criminal operation from inside prison. Doris Payne. Doris Payne didn't smash display cases or draw attention to herself with force. She walked directly through the front doors of the most expensive jewelry stores in the world, dressed well, composed, soft-spoken, and almost invisible in the way only confident people can be. And over the course of more than 6 decades, she turned that quiet presence into what has been described as one of the longest documented theft careers of its kind in American history. According to court records and historical media reporting, she began stealing as a young woman in the 1950s and 60s, initially taking small items from department stores before graduating to fine jewelry counters, mastering the psychology of sales associates rather than the mechanics of theft. She learned exactly how store environments were designed to reward politeness and trust rather than suspicion. While most thieves relied on speed or fear, Doris relied on human behavior. Specifically, how easily people relaxed once they believed someone belonged. By the 1970s and 1980s, she had shifted almost entirely to high-end luxury jewelers, targeting stores where single pieces were worth more than entire houses. She operated under dozens of documented aliases, using fake driver's licenses, birth dates, and addresses, and she traveled using different names and paperwork that allowed her to move between the United States, France, Switzerland, and Monaco with minimal scrutiny. One of the incidents most commonly reported occurred in 1991 in Monaco, where she walked into a luxury boutique, engaged staff in extended conversation, and walked out with a 10.5-carat diamond ring worth more than $500,000 at the time, a theft that went unnoticed until inventory was checked much later. She was later detained for 9 months in Monaco before release because authorities were unable to locate the ring. Across her lifetime, Doris was arrested more than 20 times, with charges ranging from larceny to grand theft across multiple states and countries. She served time in prisons in Texas, California, Nevada, and France, Yet her reputation continued to grow even as her freedom shrank, because stores across the luxury retail world began sharing warnings about a polite, well-spoken older black woman who had a habit of walking out with impossible things. In her later years, the pattern didn't stop. In 2013, when she was already in her 80s, she was arrested in San Diego after stealing more than $20,000 worth of jewelry while wearing a court-ordered GPS ankle monitor, a detail that stunned investigators because it was said to show that even active supervision hadn't broken the pattern of behavior. Even when released again, she was arrested multiple times afterward for similar offenses at luxury department stores. There is no public evidence that Doris Payne directs any criminal network today, and no indication that she oversees crews or organized operations. But what remains unmistakable is that her behavior was never simply about money. She rarely sold the jewels at market value, rarely lived lavishly, and often took risks that didn't make financial sense, leading some investigators to publicly suggest that she may not have been driven solely by profit. For Doris Payne, it appeared to be about identity. Charmaine Roman, an immigrant woman living quietly in Orlando's suburbs, never looked dangerous, and that was exactly the design. In the quiet suburbs of Central Florida, she blended into normal streets and ordinary routines, living a life that felt invisible to anyone not looking closely. But behind that calm front, investigators alleged the existence of a network that was believed to be moving large quantities of marijuana across state lines, with large quantities alleged to have moved across state and national borders, through freight trucks, mail shipments, private couriers, and stash houses hidden in plain sight. Authorities allege that Charmaine held a central role in the organization. On paper, she looked unremarkable, but in intercepted phone calls and wiretaps, however, authorities described her role as consistent with leadership. In one federal court-documented motion, it was noted, on September 30th, 2013, Charmaine Roman was arrested and described in court documents as a queenpin in charge of a violent Jamaican drug trafficking ring involving 50 people. Her true weapon was never the drugs themselves. It was identity. When agents raided her home in 2013, they didn't just find evidence of trafficking, they found layers of different lives. Multiple driver's licenses, passports, social security cards, and credit cards, many bearing her face but carrying entirely different names. According to reports, one ID listed the name Antoinette Lewis. Authorities publicly questioned the accuracy of her documented identity. The operation wasn't just about moving drugs, it was about money. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars flowed through the organization. According to official reports, law enforcement seized more than 3,212 pounds of cannabis, cash, firearms, and vehicles in one major bust. At one point, media reports credited Roman with winning more than $187,000 in lottery scratch-off tickets between 2010 and 2012, a win so public it reportedly drew armed robbers who believed she was hiding far more than she let on. Then, everything collapsed. In October 2013, the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation announced that Roman and her boyfriend, the man investigators described as a ringleader, were arrested along with nearly 50 others tied to the operation. She faced significant trafficking charges and was processed through Florida's criminal court system, with no public records clearly showing how long she remained in custody after the case broke. To this day, there is no verified information available about the exact length of her sentence, her current incarceration status, or any ongoing role in a criminal enterprise. Delronda Big 50 Hood. Delronda Hood became known on the east side of Detroit long before television cameras ever followed her story, not because she hid quietly in the background, but because she operated openly in an environment where most people tried to stay unseen. She grew up in Detroit in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a period when the city's drug economy was deeply entrenched in street-level power structures, and her nickname, Big 50, wasn't random. According to her own interviews, the name came from her reputation for never playing small, always keeping 50 as a reference to size, weight, and status, not physical size, but presence. In street culture at the time, 50 was understood as shorthand for someone who operated at a higher level, moved serious volume, and wasn't viewed as disposable. By her late teens and early 20s, she had described herself as organizing. Her role wasn't about running corners personally. She has described herself as a coordinator, someone who controlled people, money flow, territory, and protection, rather than touching the product directly. Her operation focused on recruiting street-level workers, controlling housing locations, shifting locations to avoid police pressure, and enforcing loyalty inside her circle. She has described her role as more managerial than hands-on. Public records and interviews reflect where that life eventually led. Public records and interviews indicate that she faced multiple arrests throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, with charges including allegations involving drug-related cases, financial misconduct, and weapons-related offenses. One of her most serious arrests occurred in the early 2000s, when she was taken into custody in connection with felony narcotics and firearm allegations, which court records and interviews describe, as resulting in a period of incarceration in Michigan. She has publicly referenced serving multiple years in state prison, though exact sentencing details vary by source, and she often controls how much detail she shares. What makes her story different from others isn't secrecy. It's what she talked about. She never pretended to be something else. She described herself as loud, confrontational, and comfortable being seen, which she said made her both respected and targeted by law enforcement and rivals. After her release, she published a memoir in September 2022 titled A Hood Tale: Beyond BET with Big 50, sharing her life in Detroit, the rise and fall, and what came after. She's also appeared at literary forums, for example, a scheduled talk at the Latino Literary Forum, Arts Tina Tian, in October, and her story was dramatized in the 2021 BET film American Gangster Presents Big 50, the Delronda Hood story. Alongside these, she maintains a public presence on social media and in interviews, bringing her bold persona into the light rather than letting it fade. By 2025, there is no public evidence of active criminal leadership or current street operations tied to her. No open federal cases, no verified ongoing criminal indictments. But her legacy in Detroit culture remains. Perian Roberts. Perian Roberts never looked like someone from the streets. She looked like someone from a boardroom. Growing up in Alabama during the 1980s and 1990s, she moved through Catholic school classrooms, beauty pageants, and even pre-law studies, while later media accounts described her as being connected to a highly structured drug operation. To the public, she appeared polished, educated, and grounded in her community. But behind the scenes, she claimed her world was far more organized. According to Roberts' own accounts and media interviews, she claimed to have managed a network of more than 70 people involved in drug distribution across Alabama, and stated that her supply chains extended beyond the state. In one interview, she noted that the operation generated at least $2 million a month. To the outside world, she was presented as a local success story, a business-minded woman with status and visibility, not someone expected to become a central name in a drug war, but the structure eventually cracked. Although she was first arrested in 1992, her case stretched on for more than a decade as prosecutors built larger conspiracy cases tied to broader trafficking networks. It wasn't until 2004 that she was formally sentenced to a lengthy prison term for drug trafficking charges, long after the original operation had already collapsed. In a surprising turn, she was released before her original prison term and, on January 24, 2014, received a full pardon from the Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles, officially closing the legal chapter of her case. The board never publicly detailed its exact reasoning for her release. Instead of disappearing, Roberts stepped into the public eye. She became an author, advocate, and speaker, using her story as a platform for criminal justice reform and second chances. She published a workbook titled Criminal Thinking Reform in 2023, a guide designed to help incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals break cycles of criminal behavior and rebuild structured, lawful lives. Alongside her writing, she began speaking publicly about rehabilitation, accountability, and re-entry, reframing her past as a warning rather than a boast. There is no verified evidence that she is involved in illegal activity in 2025. Thelma Wright. Thelma Wright never planned to become a queenpin, but in 1986 her life took a sudden turn. Her husband, Jackie Jahid Wright, who was described in court and media reports as a prominent drug dealer in Philadelphia, was found murdered, wrapped in a rug. Jackie's death left a power vacuum in his drug operation, and Thelma had a choice: walk away or step in. She chose to step in. At the time, Jackie was linked by authorities to a trafficking network that was alleged to have moved drugs across multiple states. The network wasn't just about moving product, it was about control over territory, routes, and supply chains. Jackie had a reputation for being meticulous and ruthless, and Thelma took those lessons and adapted them to her own management style. After his death, prosecutors alleged that Thelma assumed control of parts of the organization, including courier management and operational logistics. At its peak, media and court filings described earnings of up to $400,000 per month. Thelma was often described by those who knew her as highly organized. According to reports and later interviews, she worked to keep operations running smoothly while maintaining a low personal profile. Authorities alleged the use of front businesses to conceal income and claimed she operated under more than one identity, though exact details have varied by source. Her leadership style was known for its discipline and directness. She kept people in line by maintaining strong personal relationships with her crew, ensuring loyalty by balancing trust with the understanding that betrayal would come with consequences. Unlike other figures in the drug game who relied on violence to enforce their authority, Thelma was described as more focused on risk management and organization. She was described by prosecutors and media reports as being involved in coordinating aspects of the wider operation. Despite the calm, controlled exterior, Thelma was no stranger to the violence that came with the territory. She had learned from her husband's mistakes and had become a skilled negotiator in a world built on intimidation and power. But eventually, the chaos caught up with her. In one close call, she later said she narrowly escaped a violent confrontation that made her realize how much danger she was in. The threat wasn't just from law enforcement, but from rival gangs, former associates, and even people she had trusted. This, coupled with mounting pressure from law enforcement, she said she began distancing herself from high-risk involvement. She started pulling back from the high-risk parts of the business. Over time, she gradually distanced herself from street-level operations, trading the city's noise for suburban distance. She began cutting ties with her old network, becoming less visible in the day-to-day of the operation. Her exit from the streets wasn't abrupt, but a careful, calculated move that allowed her to transition into a quieter life as she distanced herself from the remaining activity around her. By 2025, Thelma is living mostly off the grid. There is no confirmed evidence that she is involved in criminal activity. She has largely stayed out of public life. While some commentators have speculated that older organizational patterns in Philadelphia resemble methods once attributed to her, there is no verified evidence of ongoing involvement. Some of these women disappeared, some were imprisoned, some rebuilt their lives, and some stories simply stopped having clear answers. Click one of our other videos on screen to keep going.